Next question, company rules. Next topic, company rule acts and policy. Very, very important. Please do look at it carefully. The tendency for increased litigation was visible after the introduction. So the next topic I am taking after the company expansion, establishment of the rule is what policy they followed, okay, in their administration. The tendency for increase, now you must have seen so far that the battles and wars, the British era, no, in the last decade, no longer it is the focus. The tendency for increased litigation was visible after the introduction of the land settlement of the 1793 by Lord Cornwallis. The reason for this is is normally traced to which of the following provisions. So 1793 land settlement, Cornwallis land settlement, these remain a very popular topic. All the land settlement, all the British experiment, because land revenue from ancient period even till the colonial times, from the till the trade become very important, remained a very principal source of revenue, land tax, you can say so. Jameen kar, from the agriculture part, share of the crop. This was the primarily a tax form, because the trade was because means of communication and transport were not that great, but with time, with modern age, it became secondary one. So Lord so 1793 land settlement system, Zamindari system, then Ryot system and Mahalwari system were introduced by the Britishers there after experimenting with a number of other systems. So the reason for 1793 land settlement system is traced to which of the following provisions? A. Making Zamindar position stronger with respect to the Ryot. Ryot is the individual farmer, individual peasant. Second, making East India Company and overlord of Zamindars, making judicial system more efficient. Judicial system, is it related to land settlement system of the Lord Cornwallis to the judicial system? It was the motive. Can that be motive? The answer is no, it is not totally. The first, it is wrong totally. Making, let's look at the other. Making Zamindar's position stronger with respect to why they are concerned about Zamindar's position? No. Making East India Company an overlord of Zamindars? Yes, if you look at just by the logic, yes, it is possible. It is possible. East India Company or Zamindars were who were Zamindars? Mughal Zamindars. They are the land owners too. Though different from Jagirdars, we have discussed this question in medieval India video, that Zamindars and what is the difference in Mughal Zamindars and Jagirdars? That Jagirdars were those people who are given land assignment, but Zamindars were the landowners. But making East India Company an overload of existing Zamindars and also expanding their domain or their areas of control, but it is also wrong. The reason I will tell you now. The reforms of Cornwallis had increased the litigation, and the main reason for this was the court fee was removed, and now everybody could drag anybody court. This is talking about 1791. 1791 settlement, and it was, the settlement was not that successful, and there was dispute from both sides, from company side as well as Zamindar side. The extension to the right of appeal was also one of the reason court fee abolished and lawyers were to prescribe their fees. This is simple. It does mean that the disputes were abundant. Ordinary people could sue the government servants if they committed mistakes, inhuman punishment, etc. This is nothing. And thus these reasons has nothing to do with, because these are totally out of place. This is something in which you will get confused, but this was not, because this was not the purpose of the Cornwallis and the East India Company administration was to get maximize the revenue benefits. They want to maximize their income, so that is the sole purpose. This was the secondary purpose. Okay, the reason which is normally traced to, it is normally traced to, this is the principal reason, the primary reason for that, and not any secondary reason. These are totally illogical, and hence the answer should be D. Our next section is important movements, tribal insurrection, peasant movement, and civil unrest, etc. against the colonial masters called East India Company in 19th century. We will do about of 20th century peasant, civilian, and other movements in another section. So the first question, which amongst the following provided a common factor for tribal insurrection in India in the 19th century? Common factor. Okay, entire 19th century period, common factor. Introduction of a new system of land revenue and taxation of tribal products. New system introduction, land revenue system like Zamindari settlement, okay, Ryot settlement, and taxation of the tribal products, okay. Then common factor we have to talk about. Influence of, it was a factor, but but it was whether it is a common factor. Influence of foreign religious missionaries in tribal areas, yes, it was a factor, but was it a common factor in all the tribal insurrection, tribal revolts, tribal rebellions? Rise of a large number of the moneylenders, traders, and revenue farmers as middlemen in tribal areas, yes, it was a factor, but was it a common factor? The complete disruption of the old agrarian order of the tribal communities. Okay, now all of them are correct. In the first one, we choose the most appropriate one. Okay, 19th century tribal insurrections, common factor. This is asked. This is correct. Taxation on tribal products, land revenue system, new system. Okay, leaving very little in the hands of the actual peasant, actually tribal guys who did their handicrafts and collected the jungle products like honey, etc. Influence of the missionaries, okay, introduction of the missionaries and the middlemen, the coups, they are known as in the various parts of the central India tribal region, the complete disruption. So all these are correct, but which is the most appropriate, which can be a common factor? The last one, because the last one, the language is such that it incorporates all of these factors. The complete disruption of the complete disruption. So in language, it is more aggregating. Complete disruption of the old agrarian order and of the tribal communities and replacement with a new. This is the new one. This was the new agrarian order, new order, that missionaries were there, new taxation system was there, as well as number of middlemen were introduced. Three factors were the, if you want to summarize it, religious element, revenue middlemen, and enhanced taxation. This was the new system and it impacted the tribal negatively in economic as well as socio-religious aspect, and this was a complete disruption of the old agrarian order of the tribal communities when they collected their products from jungle, from forest areas, when they manufactured their tribal handicrafts and they sell it to the neighboring markets without any middlemen who were supported by the British legal system, and who are not subject to such taxations or harassment by tax officials or high rates of taxation in earlier order, an earlier system. So that is why, and also the activities of missionaries that who denigrated their tribal beliefs and they wanted them to convert and to show their show back in Europe that we are doing good, and a lot of financial inputs were also given by them, although some of the missionaries also had some good motives and they helped a lot of Indian village tribal communities with the modern medicine supplies, etc., and they do help them overcome their inward looking attitude and to reject, to drop some of the age old tribal practices like human sacrifices, and State force also helped that, but primarily most of the missionaries were for the conversion purposes. That's it. With reference to the period of colonial rule in India, home charges here. This is the next question, economic critic component itself. That is why I have distributed all these questions in topic wise, so that it will be easier for you to understand how many questions from a particular topic has been asked, and to understand them together. Home charges formed an important part in drain of wealth. That is drain of wealth. Economic critic, drain of wealth. Dadabhai Naoroji, R.C. Dutt were the principal exponent of this theory. Which of the following funds constituted home charges? Funds. Statement 1. Funds used to support the India office in London. Yes, there was an India office at London which was in charge of the affairs of India. Any reports from India, from Indian government, British Indian government. There was one British government there, and Indian government is known as British Indian government. That came to it, and that as a process, through a procedure, it was sent to the higher authorities in London of British government, and there were obviously, it was an office, it was there were staff, and so all the expenses were from the revenues of British Indian government, although it was in London. Funds used to pay salaries and pensions of British personnel engaged in India, including British soldiers and bureaucrats. I mentioned that as well. Yes, it is correct. And then last one, funds used for waging wars outside India by the British. Yes, this is one big component of economic drain in 19th century and even in 20th century. Be it 19th century war, British wars against Nepal, against Afghanistan, against Burma. These wars were funded by Indian revenue. In fact, Indian soldiers, many of the Indian natives, those become sepoys. They were trained and disciplined like British European sepoys, and it was considered as a very reputed service by Indians, because Indians, by this British attitude, also developed a feeling of lowliness, you can say. They considered British as superior in race at that time, and many considered even the small job as under the Britishers, as the British Saab, as very good, as reputed in the society or the village community in which they live. And through these soldiers, they established their control in India, they ruled in India, and also expanded their rule in other neighboring areas of Asia. And later on, they also fought the wars in Europe as well. Yes, like First World War, number of the Indian soldiers died in protecting the Europeans, in protecting the British and allies, and so is in Second World War. So these funds of India, which were looted from the India, were not used for the development of India, development of the modern India, is development of industry. They were used just for the British interests. And R.C. Dutt's Economic History of India, which the book which I just mentioned, I just took this paragraph from there. If you look at it, what it says? What it says as the home charges of the Indian government as really. Let's look at read it carefully. It is very interesting. Home charges of the Indian government as really from the tribute out of Indian exchequer. Okay, those, that is as, so Indian jo exchequer, Indian finances, Indian revenue, we are paying a tribute as a subsidiary, as a to our superior masters, to colonial masters, as a tribute, like a subordinate king pays tribute to the superior power, to superior sovereign. these charges would be probably found to be the dividends of, so what are the components? Dividends on the East India Company, because it was a company stock. As the company rule expanded, strengthened in India, its areas expanded, its activities expanded, obviously companies share value enhanced, and the profits on enhanced, interest in home debt. So what company did? Anything expenses which they took loan from the British banks, like railways. They got loan from the British uh, investors, British banks, and they laid it and they paid huge interest on that. It was investment of the Britishers for the British interest, British benefit. It was laid, not for the, nowadays some people say, okay, British, what government of India did in last 60 years? They only maintained it. They didn't laid much of the railway lines. Only little bit of railway lines are expanded, like called Konkan Railway, metros in various parts of the country, but that is huge cost. But what about the rest of the country's railway lines? They only maintained it, and the quality of the railway for the general public is still not good. Although nowadays we have seen some good rail improvement in railways, but at the same time there is criticism about the uh, the privatization of the some of the services. But we have to look at the historical aspect as well to come to this conclusion about the current aspects of the railways, what happened in the post independence history of railway being the largest enterprise in India public, which gives public employment, right? But what is the future? Can we remain stagnant? We have to go to the future as well. So when we judge something, that whether our government in the last 60-70 years has what it has done, it cannot be just on solely on the basis of a single fact that uh, railway, what is the total length of railways in 1947 or 1945 1950 period, and what is it was in 2010 or 2020. It is not just a mere fact. Actually, even that railway lines which were, though British engineering was helped by it, but they introduced it. They didn't introduce more, industries on their own. They introduced it whenever they desired it. It is for their benefit. Their self-interest, their own interest was the supreme. Even today's time, look at the USA. USA does everything in its own self-interest. The country's self-interest is supreme. So whatever they did it for themselves. If any long-term positive effect comes to it, we are not grateful to them. It because whatever we have already paid for that, our ancestors has paid for it, and paid for it in, I mean, far greater terms than it would have cost at that time. Next line. Establishment of the building connected with the Home Department of Indian government, the Home Office. Furlough and retired pay to the members of Indian military and services, like bureaucrats and military men, pension and salaries. Home charges of all description paid in the country connected with the British troops serving in India, and portion of the cost of transporting the British group to and from India, like the last line, that the British Indian troops, one say 10 British or European commanders leading some, say, hundreds of Indian troops. Okay, so this is how they were doing it, and they divided British Indian military in on the racial and caste groups, religious. There is Sikh battalion, Rajput, Jat, Gorkha Rifles. Okay, so everything they did it so that their nationalistic, pan-Indian nationalistic feeling should not develop, and they will like divide and rule policy, which is fundamental strategy from, say, even before 1857, and again Raja and Nawab versus their praja, their civilians. Okay, appease one rajas and nawabs, it is easier to deal with them, and telling them it is contrary to their interest to take care of those guys. Rather, you should appropriate maximum out of the from their efforts by taxation. Share something to us and we will protect you from any danger from their rebellion, etc. Similarly, on religious line, Hindu, Muslim, caste lines, and area specific, martial, non-martial communities. Okay, so this is how divide and rule was implemented, policy was implemented in by Britishers.